She smiled before she apologized. That was what her father remembered later. Not the spilled lemonade, not the slap, the smile she gave him when she said everything was fine. Emma Cross worked evenings at Rosie's Diner, kept her fear folded small, and said nothing. Because she knew what her father used to be, and she knew what telling him might cost. She was wrong about the danger, just not about the direction it was coming from. Daniel Cross had spent 12 years becoming someone his daughter could trust. A retired fighter, a single father, a man who fixed engines with scarred hands and never talked about the years before. He had buried the version of himself that crowds used to cheer for. What he could not bury was what Ryder Kane had been doing in the quiet spaces Daniel did not know to watch. And on a Saturday afternoon at a downtown festival, everything Emma had hidden, every refused number, every blocked car door, every closed shift turned dangerous, was about to surface in front of 100 strangers and a very old trainer who recognized Daniel's face and went pale. The town Daniel Cross lived in was the kind where everyone knew your name and half of them owed a favor to the same family. Calvin Kane had built that quietly, the way powerful men usually do, not through force, but through presence. His name was on the banner outside the festival. His logo was on the youth league jerseys. His gym sat at the center of the commercial strip like a monument to the idea that strength and money were the same thing. Kane Combat Academy had produced 2 regional champions and 1 state runner up in the past 4 years. The better-known champion was Ryder. Ryder Kane was 24 and had never been told no in a way that stuck. He had followers online who filmed his training clips and called him elite. He had a regional belt he wore to local appearances. He had a father who smoothed every complaint, paid every settlement before it became a story, and smiled at every person who might one day need to be managed. In a town that size, that combination is not just privilege. It is a weather system. Everyone learns to dress for it. Victor Hale had been trying to change that weather for 3 years. He was the head trainer at Kane Combat Academy and had been coaching fighters for longer than Ryder had been alive. He had seen talent become arrogance before, had watched young men confuse the ability to hurt people with the right to. He had filed 2 internal complaints about Ryder's behavior toward women at the gym. Both were reviewed by Calvin and quietly closed. Victor stayed because his old gym had shuttered and he needed the work, and because part of him believed he could still reach the boy through training. He was wrong about that. But he had not yet found the courage to be loud about it. Not yet. Emma Cross did not know any of this history when Ryder Kane first walked into Rosie's Diner 6 weeks before the festival. She knew his face the way everyone in town knew it, from the banner on Main Street, from the local sports coverage, from the way people moved around him in rooms. She smiled, took his order, and brought it correctly. He left a small tip and a comment about her eyes that she pretended not to hear. She had learned to pretend at a lot of things since her mother died. The grief had changed Emma in ways that were hard to name. She still attended classes. She still showed up for every evening shift. She still answered her father's check-in texts with short, steady replies. But something had gone inward, some light that used to sit close to the surface. Daniel noticed. He noticed the way she paused before laughing now, as if checking first whether it was allowed. He noticed she ate less, slept later, and never asked to go anywhere. So when she appeared in the doorway of his garage on that Saturday morning and said there was a festival downtown and maybe they could go for an hour, he closed the shop without hesitating. Bills are patient, daughters are not. For 20 minutes, the day was almost ordinary. Emma laughed at something. The sound was genuine, unguarded, arriving before she could stop it. And Daniel held on to it the way you hold a match in wind. He bought her lemonade from a stand near the festival center. He teased her about an old photograph on his phone. The afternoon felt like the beginning of something returning. Then they drifted toward the demonstration mat. It had been set up near the center of the grounds by Kane Combat Academy, a raised platform with padded corners and the gym's banner stretched above it. Ryder was there already, holding court in a red and off-white sleeveless jacket, gold watch catching the sun. The kind of man who treats every public space as a stage he was born to stand on. He had an audience. He always had an audience. That was the problem, and as it turned out, the solution. Emma did not see the crowd shift. Someone stepped back. Someone's elbow caught her shoulder. The lemonade tipped, splashed across the sleeve of Ryder's jacket, and the afternoon changed. She apologized immediately. Twice, her voice was clear and direct. The voice of someone who has learned to de-escalate the way other people learn arithmetic. But Ryder had a phone already filming him, and an apology offered in front of cameras is not what men like Ryder want. They want a scene. He looked at his sleeve, looked at the phone, and said loudly, "Little waitress ruined my jacket." The word waitress did not land like an accident. Emma froze. Daniel heard her breathing change before he understood what had caused it. He turned and saw his daughter standing, very still, the way a person stands when they have rehearsed this exact situation and still do not know what to do. He walked over without hurrying, which is harder than it sounds when someone is looking at your child that way. He introduced himself. He offered to pay for cleaning. He opened his wallet, 3 20s, 2 singles, and a grocery receipt folded beside a photograph of Emma taken the summer before everything changed. He held the cash out evenly and said, simply, "Let it end." Ryder looked at the money. Then he slapped it from Daniel's hand. The bills scattered across the grass. Emma flinched. Daniel did not. That stillness, that absolute absence of a flinch, confused Ryder in a way he was not prepared for. He was accustomed to 2 reactions, submission or aggression. Daniel gave him neither. He just watched. Calmness to a man who runs on dominance does not read as composure. It reads as contempt. Daniel bent and picked up the bills. He said they were leaving. He took Emma's hand and turned. That should have been the end of it. The crowd was already reshaping, already moving on. Daniel had offered every exit a reasonable man could offer. He had swallowed the insult, recovered the money, chosen his daughter over his pride. Most people would call that wisdom. Ryder called it weakness. He grabbed Daniel's shoulder from behind, and at the back of the circle, an old trainer named Victor Hale, who had been watching from the moment he recognized the way Daniel's feet rested on the grass, took 1 step forward and said the name he had been holding like a warning. But Ryder had already made his decision, and the crowd, which had been drifting away, turned back. What none of them knew yet was that Emma had not just spilled a drink on a stranger. She had spilled it on the man who had been showing up at her workplace for 6 weeks. The man who had asked for her number 3 times. The man who had waited outside after closing and blocked her car door with his body and leaned against the window until she agreed to stay another 10 minutes. And her father had no idea, not one word. She had kept it inside like a stone she was afraid to put down because she did not know what it would cost him to pick it up. He was about to find out. Victor Hale moved through the crowd the way old trainers move, not fast but direct, like a man who has seen enough to know when fast is already too late. He had recognized Daniel the moment he spotted him across the festival grounds. Not from any recent encounter, from the way Daniel stood. A fighter carries their training in the architecture of their stillness. The weight distribution, the quiet in the hands, the way the eyes move without the head turning. Victor had spent 30 years coaching fighters, and he had only ever trained one who moved like that. He had not expected to see him here. He had not expected to need to protect the crowd from the situation they were all walking toward without knowing it. Victor pushed through the outer ring of people and reached the edge of the circle just as Ryder closed his fingers around Daniel's shoulder from behind. In the training world, there is a thing experienced fighters call the telegraph. The tiny physical signal a body sends before it commits to a technique. A tensing of the shoulder, a shift of the hip, a breath held a half-second too long. Most people never learn to read it. Some fighters learn to read it under competition conditions when the adrenaline is already running. A very small number of fighters learn to read it so deeply that it becomes reflexive, a form of listening that operates beneath conscious thought. Daniel Cross heard it before Ryder's hand even made contact. He did not spin. He did not raise his hands. He turned, slowly, the way you turn when someone calls your name in a quiet room, and he removed Ryder's grip with a single controlled movement. Fingers to wrist, slight rotation. Enough pressure applied at exactly the right angle that Ryder's hands simply opened, like a door with a defective latch. Ryder felt it in his forearm before he understood what had happened. His face changed for half a second, something moving behind the arrogance. Not pain, something worse. Recognition. He covered it quickly. Victor stepped into the circle. He said Ryder's name. He said, "Leave him." Ryder barely glanced at him and told him to stay out of it. Victor looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Ryder. The crowd looked at everyone and stayed exactly where they were. Because the thing about public conflict is that people do not leave until they know how it ends. This is human nature. We tell ourselves we are watching out of concern, but mostly we are watching because we want to know if the story is going to go the direction we expect. Ryder pointed at the demonstration mat. He told Daniel to get in there. Daniel said no. Ryder asked if he was scared. Daniel looked at Emma before he answered. He said something that sounded like it came from years of living with the consequences of not saying it sooner. He said being called scared costs nothing. Becoming violent costs everything. Some people in the crowd laughed. Others went quiet. The line had a weight to it that landed differently depending on what you were carrying when you heard it. A few people heard a cleach. A few people heard a man speaking from a place that had cost him something real. Ryder heard none of that. What Ryder heard was applause going to someone else. He shifted around Daniel and looked directly at Emma. He told her that her father gives speeches because he cannot fight. Emma's face went pale. And then Ryder tilted his head and something crossed his expression. The slow ignition of recognition. He studied her face, and whatever file he was searching through internally, he found what he was looking for. He said, "Rosie's Diner." Those two words did more damage than anything else he had said that afternoon. Emma's fingers went cold inside Daniel's hand, not from fear of what Ryder might say next. From the knowledge that the two parts of her life she had been keeping sealed apart were now in the same circle, under the same afternoon sun, with the same audience. Daniel turned toward his daughter. He asked what Ryder was talking about. Emma lowered her eyes. Ryder grinned. He had the specific pleasure of a man who has just found the exact right lever and knows how to pull it. He told the crowd that he had come in a few times, asked for her number, and she had walked away like she was something special. Emma said quietly that she had said no. Ryder said she had been rude about it. Daniel's voice dropped to a register that was not anger. It was something older. He asked how many times. Emma did not answer. That silence did what nothing else in the preceding 10 minutes had managed to do. It reached Daniel Cross in the place underneath the training, underneath the control, underneath 12 years of choosing peace over what he used to be. A father can absorb a great deal. He can absorb being laughed at, being challenged, being dismissed in public by a younger and louder man. What he cannot absorb without cost is the moment he realizes his child has been frightened in spaces he did not know to protect. That the silence at the dinner table on certain evenings had a specific cause. That the question he had asked too few times had an answer she had already decided he could not handle. Victor reached Daniel's side. His face carried two things simultaneously: the urgency of the present moment and the weight of something much older. He told Daniel quietly to walk away. Ryder laughed. He asked Victor if he knew Daniel. Victor looked at Ryder with the particular exhaustion of a man who has watched a preventable thing happen too many times to still be surprised. He said, "Kid, you have no idea." Daniel told Victor not to say anything. Victor looked at the crowd, at the phone still lifted, at Ryder's posture, at Calvin Kane's banner hanging above the demonstration mat. And then he said what he had been carrying since he first spotted Daniel across the festival grounds. He said, "This man was the fastest fighter I ever trained." The crowd murmured. Ryder rolled his eyes. He called Daniel a tired mechanic. Victor did not look at Ryder when he continued. He said Daniel did not win because he was angry. He won because nobody could touch him. Emma looked at her father with an expression that had no name for it in the standard vocabulary of daughters. It was the look of seeing a locked door open slightly in someone you thought you knew completely. She said "Dad" like a question. Daniel did not look back at her. His eyes stayed on Ryder, steady, measuring nothing, waiting for the next decision to be made. Ryder bounced on his toes. He said, "Perfect. Then he can prove it." Daniel said he does not prove things to boys. That hit harder than anything physical could have. The insult arrived not as volume, but as verdict. The calm assessment of a man who has decided Ryder does not qualify for the category of people worth anger. Ryder shoved Daniel in the chest. Emma cried out. Daniel stepped back once, then stopped. He stood exactly where he had stopped, and he did not step forward. Ryder spread his arms to the crowd. He said, "Come on, 1 minute, he would make Daniel famous." Phones rose higher. The circle tightened. Daniel bent down, picked up the fallen bills from where Ryder had slapped him earlier, and folded them back into his wallet. There was laughter. Ryder said, "Look at him," picking up grocery money. And then, from the far edge of the crowd, a new presence entered the circle. Calvin Kane walked in, wearing a black polo with the gym logo centered on the chest. He had silver hair and a diamond watch and the practiced ease of a man who has never had to raise his voice to get a room to cooperate. He smiled at Daniel. He smiled at Emma. He smiled at the crowd the way a person smiles when they have decided in advance that smiling is the correct management tool for this situation. Ryder said he was disrespected. Emma said that was not true. Calvin looked at her gently, which was somehow the most unsettling thing he did. He told her that public events get emotional, that his son is under pressure. Victor stepped forward and said Ryder had been harassing people for months. Calvin's smile stayed exactly where it was. He said to be careful. The crowd felt that word land, not as a warning, as architecture. Calvin Kane had built something in this town over many years, and careful was the load-bearing beam of it. It was the word his son had grown up hearing applied to other people. People who had complaints, people who had stories, people who had decided at some point that nothing they said would be heard the way they meant it. Careful was the reason Emma had not told her father. Careful was the reason Victor had filed 2 reports that went nowhere. Careful was what the town had learned to be around the name Kane. And then Emma's voice came through it. It shook at first. She said he waited outside the diner after closing. She said he blocked her car once. She said she told her manager, but her manager said his father sponsors everything. Daniel turned toward her slowly. The festival, the crowd, the cameras, Victor, Calvin, Ryder, all of it went behind glass. He said, "You never told me." She whispered that she did not want him to get hurt or arrested. That sentence broke something in him. Quietly, the way old chains break underwater, without spectacle, without sound, just a giving way that is only visible in what comes after. She had not told him because she was protecting him. Not from Ryder Kane, from himself, from who she knew he used to be, and what she feared he might become again if the weight of what she was carrying was transferred to his hands. She had been carrying it alone. For 6 weeks, every shift at Rosie's Diner, every locked car door, every walk to the parking lot where she had learned to check if a red and off-white jacket was visible before she opened her driver's side door. Daniel looked at Ryder, then at Calvin. Then at the wall of phone cameras forming around the circle. He asked a question to no one in particular. He asked what happens to the next girl who says no. Nobody laughed. The dynamic of the crowd changed in that moment. It is a shift that people who have been in rooms where truth lands can describe but not predict. The noise did not stop. But the quality of the noise changed. People who had been watching a spectacle were now watching something real. People who had been filming for entertainment were now filming because they understood, dimly or clearly, that they were watching evidence of something. Ryder felt it. He felt the crowd shifting the way a fighter feels the momentum of a bout turning in the 3rd round. And because he had never been trained in any skill more important than fighting, he did the only thing he knew. He raised his voice. He told Daniel to fight him or admit he was nothing. Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them, he released Emma's hand. Victor grabbed his arm. He said Daniel's name. He said, "Don't go back." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he said he was not going back. He said he was ending it without becoming him. He stepped toward the mat, and in that step, everything that had been building since the lemonade spill, since the first shift at Rosie's Diner, since the last complaint Victor filed and Calvin quietly closed, since Emma decided her fear was something she had to carry alone, so her father could stay the man she needed him to be, all of it arrived at the same point in space. The crowd went still. Ryder tore off his jacket, rolled his shoulders, and bounced onto the mat with his chin up and his hands loose in the way fighters carry them when they want to look casual and dangerous at once. He had trained for this. He had done this in front of cameras before. He had won. What he had never done was stand across from someone who had already decided how this ends. Daniel rolled his sleeves above the wrist. Emma saw the scars on his knuckles for the first time, and she asked Victor quietly why he had stopped fighting. Victor swallowed. He said because the last man who challenged him did not stand up for a long time. He said your father won, but he hated what winning made him feel. Before Emma could answer, Ryder attacked. No bell, no referee, no warning. Ryder's right hand came toward Daniel's face with all the speed that a regional belt and 4 years of daily training can produce. It was a real punch, not a spar, not a demonstration. The kind of punch thrown by someone who has decided the conversation is over and the body count can begin. Daniel shifted half a step to the left. The fist passed within an inch of his ear. The crowd gasped as one organism. Ryder spun back, read the miss on Daniel's face, and threw again. Daniel moved again. Not a dodge, not a retreat. Something more precise than either, the kind of movement that comes from a body so deeply trained that reaction has outpaced thought, as if Ryder were arriving late to coordinates Daniel had already vacated. The confusion on Ryder's face was visible from the back of the crowd. He had expected either a hit or a flinch, the two outcomes that confirm power. He received neither. Daniel stood exactly where he had stood before the punches, calm and slightly angled, and raised one open hand. He said, "Stop now." Ryder charged. Daniel caught his wrist. The entire mat froze, not because of what happened next, but because of what did not happen. Ryder pulled. Nothing moved. He pulled again with both shoulders engaged and his feet pushing against the mat. Nothing. Daniel held his wrist with one hand, lightly, the way you hold a door handle you have no intention of opening. Ryder's face cycled through confusion, then effort, then something that was not quite fear, but was its next-door neighbor. Daniel leaned forward and spoke so quietly that only Ryder heard him. The crowd watched his lips move. They watched Ryder's breathing change. They watched Ryder's posture, which had been performing confidence for the better part of an hour, go still in a way that had nothing to do with choice. Daniel said, "You threatened my daughter." He let that land. Then, you scared her. You followed her. You made her feel alone. The grip tightened one fraction, not to cause pain, to be felt. Then, and you thought the worst thing I could do was hit you. He released him. Ryder stumbled back 2 steps. His hands came up instinctively, not to strike, but to catch himself, to manage a balance that had nothing to do with his feet. The crowd that he had assembled, the phones he had been performing for, the audience he had treated as a chorus for his own story, went quiet. Not politely quiet, silently quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone in a room realizes at the same moment that the person they thought was the most powerful is not. Ryder stood in the center of the mat, and he was empty-handed in every sense that mattered. His eyes moved. They tracked across the crowd, calculating, measuring, searching for the thing that was supposed to be there. The backup. The sympathy. The small current of approval that had always been available to him in rooms like this. He found phones. He found faces. He found a circle of people who were no longer laughing with him. Then his eyes moved to the edge of the mat. A metal folding chair leaned beside a speaker at the mat's corner. Victor saw it at the same moment. He was already moving his mouth to say Daniel's name. But Ryder was faster. He grabbed the chair with both hands and swung it up. Emma screamed. The sound hit the crowd before the sight did. That specific pitch of a person who is watching something happen that cannot be taken back. Ryder had swung the chair the way a man swings something when he has stopped calculating consequences. When humiliation has burned through every other option and what is left is only the need to make the thing in front of you smaller by any means available. In the space between Emma's scream and the chair reaching the apex of its arc, something happened in Daniel Cross that has no clean name for it. Victor would describe it later in plain terms. He said Daniel's face did not change. He said that was the most frightening part. Another man's face would have changed. Anger or fear or both. Daniel's face did what it did when Ryder first grabbed his shoulder, when the money was slapped from his hand, when he heard his daughter say she thought she had to protect him from his own response. It went still. What moved behind that stillness was not visible to the crowd. Daniel saw a hospital corridor from 12 years ago. Fluorescent lights. A stretcher being moved by two orderlies. A man whose name he still carried somewhere beneath the scar tissue. A man who had challenged him in a regional bout and spent the next 14 months learning to walk in a straight line. Daniel had not intended that outcome. He had been faster and colder and more precise than the bout required. And the man had gone down in the second round in a way that took the sound out of the arena. Daniel's wife had been there. She had not screamed. She had gone very still, standing beside the ring, and when Daniel looked at her across the crowd, he saw something in her face that he had spent the years since trying to understand. It was not horror. It was grief. For what he had been capable of and what that meant going forward. He had retired 6 months later. He had never told Emma why in language she could fully hold. Then, he heard Emma say Dad. One word. The same words she had whispered when Ryder first threatened him. The same words she had said in the car that morning when she asked if they could go to the festival. The same words she had been saying her whole life, in the voice of someone learning that a parent is also a person, and that persons are complicated. One word and the hospital corridor dissolved. Daniel did not duck. He did not stumble back. He moved the way he had always moved when everything was on the line. Not away from the thing, but into it. Into exactly the geometry required to manage it. His left arm came up. The forearm caught the front leg of the chair mid-descent and turned with it, absorbing the trajectory and redirecting it rather than stopping it dead. The metal screamed across his forearm. He would feel that for 2 weeks. In the moment, he felt nothing. Ryder's momentum carried him forward, off balance, suddenly without the weight he had been swinging. Suddenly very close to a man who had just taken his weapon away with a single movement. Daniel stepped inside. He trapped Ryder's elbow against his chest with one arm. He twisted the chair out of Ryder's hands with the other. It fell to the mat. Ryder gasped, empty-handed, and looked up. Daniel's right fist stopped 1 inch from Ryder's jaw. 1 inch. Close enough to feel the air move. Close enough for every phone camera surrounding the mat to capture, in clear and undeniable footage, that Daniel had the option and did not take it. That the most dangerous man on the mat had the tools and the position and the absolute physical capacity to end the encounter with significant and permanent consequence, and chose instead to hold his fist in the air. The crowd did not cheer. That is the detail that stays with people who were there. There was no cheer. There was a silence so complete that the festival music from the food trucks, which had been playing the entire time at the edge of hearing, suddenly seemed to come from very far away. Daniel whispered. Only Ryder heard it. That was your last chance. Then Daniel lowered his hand. He stepped back. He looked at the chair on the mat. He looked at Ryder. He said, in the ordinary conversational volume of a man asking someone to return a borrowed tool, "Pick it up." Ryder blinked. Daniel said it again. "Pick it up. Put it back where it was." There was no shouting. There was no threat. There was only the quiet of a man who had already made his point in the most absolute terms possible and was now asking for basic order to be restored. Ryder bent slowly, face burning, and picked up the chair. He placed it back beside the speaker. That act, performed in front of a crowd that had watched him posture and threaten and swing metal at a man's head, was the most humiliating moment of the afternoon, and it was done voluntarily, which made it worse. Calvin moved forward. He said, "This is enough." Daniel looked at him. He said, "You should have said that when he threatened my daughter." Calvin straightened. He deployed the voice he used in board meetings and sponsorship negotiations. He told Daniel that he had assaulted his son on camera and that there would be consequences. From the crowd, a woman lifted her phone and said, "No, I got everything." Your son swung first. Then he grabbed the chair. Another voice, "I got him harassing the girl too from the start." Then another farther back, a vendor who had been watching from beside his cart. "He did it to my nephew at the gym. Told him if he tapped in sparring again, he would make sure he never got a bout in this state." The circle reorganized. That is the only word for what happened. The people who had been watching a spectacle arranged themselves into something different. They became witnesses. The phones that had been raised for entertainment were now being held with intention. The stories that had been suppressed by the specific gravity of the Kane name, by the logic of sponsors and silence, and the quiet cost of speaking up, found air in the same moment, the way fires do when a door opens. Ryder said they were lying. His voice cracked on the second word. And then Emma stepped forward. Daniel turned quickly. He told her to stay back. She shook her head. Her hands were trembling, but her feet were moving. She walked until she was standing beside her father, and she looked at Ryder Kane directly, and she told the crowd what had happened in plain language, without theater, without anything other than the specific facts. 3 visits, 3 requests for her number, 3 refusals, 1 night waiting outside after closing. 1 hand braced against her car door. 1 manager who said his father sponsors everything and she should try to be more accommodating. Ryder laughed. His laugh cracked at the edges. He said she was being dramatic. Emma looked at him with the specific steadiness of someone who has rehearsed being doubted so many times that the doubt has lost its ability to land. She told him, "You said no one would believe me." That sentence did what the controlled fist had not done. It reached the crowd in their own lives, in the complaints they had filed that went nowhere, the stories they had told that were described as misunderstandings, the times they had stayed quiet because the math of being believed had not worked out in their favor. It reached them not as a story about a stranger, but as a mirror. Ryder's friends, who had been at the periphery of the crowd throughout, took a collective step back. Not dramatically, just enough. The distance of people managing association. Victor Hale stepped onto the mat and faced Calvin. He was not loud. He said he had reported Ryder twice. He said 2 women had left the gym because of him. He said he had come to Calvin both times personally with specific names and specific incidents, and both times Calvin had told him the situations were being handled internally. Calvin said to be careful. Victor said no. He said he had been careful for too long. There was the truth that had been underneath everything. Victor was not simply an old trainer who happened to recognize a former student. He was a man who had watched Ryder Kane become who he was in increments, each one individually manageable in the moment, collectively catastrophic in retrospect. He had filed the reports not because he believed they would work, but because he needed to believe he was doing something. He had stayed at the gym after they went nowhere because he needed the work, and because leaving felt like abandoning the other fighters who were also being shaped by the culture Calvin had built. He had carried that compromise quietly for 3 years, and it made him complicit in the way that silence always does. Not actively, but by weight. He had recognized Daniel Cross across the festival grounds and felt 2 things simultaneously. Relief that someone capable was present, and shame that it had taken someone capable to make him finally use his voice. Daniel looked at Victor, not with anger, with something that acknowledged both the failure and the correction. He said one word. Names. Victor understood. He turned to the crowd and he said if Ryder had hurt anyone there, say your name. Not for revenge, for the next person he thinks is alone. Nobody moved for 3 seconds. Then Mason Lee, a young man near the food truck, raised his hand. He said his name. He said Ryder had broken his rib in sparring after he tapped, then told him if he said anything he would be cut from the program. A girl near the bleachers, Tara Miles, said she had been followed to her car after an evening class. The vendor with the cap said his nephew had quit fighting entirely and still would not explain why. One by one, the silence became names. And names became the thing Calvin Kane had spent years and significant money preventing. Calvin reached for his phone. Daniel stepped between him and Emma. Calvin leaned close and told Daniel he had no idea who he knew. Daniel nodded. He said, "That was your son's mistake too. It was not loud. It was not a threat. It was the calm observation of a man who has already watched the architecture of a thing collapse and sees no point in adding drama to physics." Calvin's smile, the one that had stayed level through all of it. The practiced, innocent smile of a man who had managed situations before, finally moved. Not into anger, into calculation. He was already figuring out which part of this could still be managed. He would not get the time. The officers assigned to festival security had been working their way through the crowd for several minutes before they reached the mat. They had heard the commotion from the far side of the grounds and had been slowed by the sheer number of people who had closed in from every direction. When they finally pushed through the outer ring, they found a demonstration mat, a folding chair placed neatly beside a speaker, a young man with no jacket standing very still, an older man with silver hair reaching for his phone, a veteran trainer standing between them, a young woman holding up her phone with shaking hands, and somewhere between 40 and 60 people, all trying to speak at the same time. Calvin Kane moved immediately. He lifted both hands in the practiced gesture of a man who has learned that visible cooperation is its own kind of defense. He told the officers that Daniel Cross had attacked his son during a sponsored public event and that there were injuries. He used the word unprovoked. He said it twice. Before Daniel could respond, the crowd answered for him. 20 people speaking at once is not testimony, it is noise. But noise with a direction carries its own weight, and every voice in that circle was pointing the same way. He swung a chair. The kid started it. We have it all on video. He grabbed the father first. That girl, he had been following her. The volume was not organized, but the consensus was absolute, and the officers heard it the way officers hear things in crowds, not as argument, but as atmosphere. One of the officers looked at Ryder. He asked to see the footage. What happened next is the part of the story that Emma Cross would spend years understanding the full shape of. She held up her phone, not to show the fight, not to show Daniel deflecting the chair or holding his fist 1 inch from Ryder's jaw. She held up footage that began earlier, much earlier. It began at the moment Ryder had tilted his head, narrowed his eyes, and said the words, "Rosie's Diner," in the particular tone of a man who has just remembered something he considers leverage. Emma had started recording before her fears showed on her face. While her voice was still steady and her posture was still composed, the camera in her hand had been running. The officer watched Ryder's recognition. He watched Ryder tell the crowd that Emma walked away like she was something special. He watched Emma say she had said no. He watched Ryder's response. He watched the bills get slapped from Daniel's hand. He watched Emma flinch. He watched the shove. He watched Ryder grab the chair. The officer's expression changed by the second. He looked at Ryder. He looked at the chair beside the speaker. He looked at Calvin. Then he said, "Mr. Kane, step off the mat." Ryder exploded. He said the officer was serious, that Daniel had put hands on him, that there were witnesses, that his father knew the mayor, that this was a sponsored event. His voice climbed into a register that none of the crowd had heard from him before. Not the confident regional champion voice, not the casual cruelty voice. but something thinner and higher. The voice of a person who has just discovered for the first time that the rules apply to them. The officer pointed at the folding chair. He said, "And you used a weapon in a crowd." He told Calvin his attorney could meet them at the station. Ryder looked around. His friends, the ones who had laughed before he finished jokes, the ones who had circled the mat with their phones raised when he strutted onto it, had taken several steps back from his position. Not dramatically, just enough. The physics of association shifting in real time. The kingdom had never been loyalty. It had been fear. And fear, when it changes direction, changes fast. Ryder turned to Calvin. Not as an adult, as a child. The word came out stripped of everything he had spent the afternoon constructing. He said, "Dad." Calvin did not answer. He was looking at the cameras. That single moment, Calvin's eyes moving to the phones instead of his son's face, landed harder on Ryder than anything Daniel had done on the mat. Daniel noticed. He looked almost sad, and Ryder saw it and hated him for it. The officers took Ryder by the arm and walked him off the mat through the watching crowd. No one clapped. No one shouted anything. There was no chant, no cheer, no collective exhale of satisfaction. There was an absence of all of those things. And in that absence, Ryder Kane walked through his own testimony. Every step exposed. Every breath audible. Every face that watched him pass the face of a person who had spent some portion of this afternoon laughing with him and was now looking at what they had been laughing with. Consequences had finally found him in daylight. And somehow, the silence was the worst part of it. Calvin tried to follow his son. Victor Hale stepped into his path. He was not large. He was 61 years old with a bad knee and a history of staying quiet at the wrong moments. He stood in Calvin's way and said, "You still owe them an apology." Calvin's face darkened. He said, "Move." Victor did not move. He stood the way he had not stood for 3 years. Straight, he told Calvin, "You taught that boy every fight could be bought. Now look at him." Calvin looked at Emma, then at Daniel, then at the phones that were still recording, which were everywhere, which would be everywhere forever in the particular way of things filmed in public in the modern age. He understood what men like him eventually understand when they run out of moves. The only currency left was damage control. He turned to Emma. He said he regretted any discomfort his son had caused. Daniel's voice came in immediately. He said, "No." Calvin froze. Daniel stepped beside his daughter. He did not raise his voice. He said, "Not discomfort." "Fear," he said, "say what it was." Calvin swallowed. The practiced ease was gone. What was left was a man in a black polo with a gym logo, standing in front of his son's victims and a wall of recording devices, with no more architecture to hide behind. He said stiffly, "I'm sorry my son made you afraid." Emma did not thank him. She did not need to. The apology was not for her, not really. It was for the record, for the cameras, for the calculation he was still performing even in that moment. She knew that. She received it with her chin level and her eyes steady and said nothing, which was its own kind of verdict. Victor turned to face the crowd. He said Kane Combat Academy would be closed until an outside board reviewed every complaint that had ever been filed. He looked at Calvin when he added, "And if you fire me before then, I will start talking louder." A murmur moved through the people. Calvin's empire, built carefully over many years on sponsorship banners and the accumulated silence of people who needed something from him, cracked in full public view, not loudly, but visibly. The way a foundation cracks, not the surface falling, but the thing beneath it giving way. Daniel stepped off the mat. Emma rushed into his arms. And the strength that he had held, the control, the absolute precision of a man who had spent 12 years choosing peace over what he was capable of. All of it disappeared into the way he held his daughter. Not controlled, not precise, careful and shaking, the way you hold something you came very close to not being able to hold at all. He whispered into her hair, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry you thought you had to be brave alone." She cried then. Not from humiliation. Not from relief that the danger had passed. From something deeper, the release of weight that had been accumulating since the first evening shift at Rosie's diner when she had decided the cost of telling her father was too high. She said, "I thought if I told you, you would fight him." Daniel closed his eyes. He said, "So did I." She pulled back enough to look at him. She asked, "Were you going to?" He looked toward the mat, then at his hands, at the scar on his forearm from the chair that was already beginning to show color. For 1 second, Emma waited. Then Daniel touched her cheek gently. He said, "Then I heard you." Victor approached. He told Daniel he should have spoken sooner. Daniel looked at him for a long moment and said, "Yes." Then he added, "But you spoke today." It was not forgiveness, not entirely. It was a door left unlocked. The festival was returning to sound around them. Vendors called out, children moved again. But something had shifted in the quality of it, the way the air shifts after rain, the same space with different pressure. Emma looked at her father as the crowd thinned. She said, "Dad." He said, "Yeah." She said, "What was your name back then?" "The one Victor almost said." Daniel leaned against a nearby post and looked at the festival flags moving in the warm wind. He said, "It doesn't matter." She said, "It matters to me." He looked at her, and the truth arrived quietly, the way it always did with him. He said, "They called me Crossfire." Emma's eyes widened. She said, "That sounds terrifying." He said it was supposed to. She asked if he missed it. He looked toward the mat, where the police lights were still visible beyond the tents, and Ryder Kane's red and off-white jacket lay abandoned on the ground beside the speaker. He said, "No. I only missed the years I thought being feared meant being safe." Emma took his hand. Not the way she had gripped it earlier, knuckles white, hiding behind his shoulder. She stood beside him. And that single shift in position, from behind to beside, was the thing that mattered most about the entire afternoon. Victor watched them walk toward the parking area. He looked at the mat, at the chair, at the banner with Calvin's name on it, and he began the quiet work of figuring out what came next. What he knew was this: the complaints that had gone nowhere would now go somewhere. The names that had been spoken aloud in front of 40 witnesses and an unknown number of phone cameras would be on record. The board review he had announced without authorization would happen because he had announced it publicly and there were too many witnesses to walk it back. He had made himself the person who said it. That was a new kind of accountability, and it was his. The video was already spreading before they reached Daniel's truck. The video was already spreading before they reached Daniel's truck. That is the part of this kind of story that never quite fits into the telling. The moment is still happening for the people inside it, the dust still settling, the adrenaline still metabolizing, the words still being sorted from the noise, and simultaneously, for thousands of strangers, it has already become a story. People online argued about the fight, the chair, the father, the restraint. Some said Daniel should have hit harder. Some said he should have walked away sooner. Some questioned why it took a confrontation at a public festival to surface what multiple complaints had failed to surface over years. That last question is the one that stays. Because the thing that happened at that festival was not primarily about Daniel Cross and Ryder Kane. It was about the conditions that made the confrontation necessary in the first place. A young woman who weighed the cost of telling her father and chose silence. A trainer who filed reports and received managed silence in return. A town that had learned, gradually and practically, that certain names carried weight that complaints did not. None of that was dramatic. None of it arrived with a gold watch and a demonstration mat. It accumulated in ordinary spaces, in diner shifts and parking lots, and internal complaint forms that were reviewed and filed away. What broke it was not a better system. It was a single Saturday afternoon when enough people were in the same circle at the same time for the silence to run out of room. Daniel Cross did not become a story because he won a fight. He became a story because he had every reason to lose control in front of a crowd and chose not to. Because the thing he had spent 12 years learning to put down, the version of himself that crowds used to cheer for, stayed down when it mattered most. That is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the hardest kind of strength there is, the kind that nobody can see until the moment you choose not to use it. Ryder Kane went looking for a fight and found a lesson. Calvin Kane tried to buy silence one more time and found that the cost of witnesses is not negotiable. Emma Cross learned that her fear, which she had been carrying as a burden, had been working all along as evidence. And Victor Hale learned what most people learn when they wait too long to speak, that the truth does not improve with storage. So tell me in the comments, should Daniel have walked away the moment Ryder grabbed his shoulder, or did something larger needed to happen in that circle for the people who were already silenced to finally find their voices? Leave your answer below. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe, because next time, we go even deeper.